Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
Lots to cover today. The Georgia 2026 gubernatorial campaign season has officially begun, and we have an announced candidate. From WXIA-TV 11 Alive in Atlanta.
Georgia's Attorney General is now making a bid for the state's highest office. Chris Carr says he plans to run for governor in 2026. That's when Governor Brian Kemp will hit his term limit. And now there's a number of candidates looking to take advantage of the open race.
That's right, Georgia voters. Gird your loins. The 2026 election campaign has just begun. Are you all well rested after the 2-week break that we got from the 2024 presidential and general election cycle to now bolster yourselves for a 2-year onslaught of he said versus he said, or he said, she said, or she said, he said, and campaign commercials just bludgeoning our ears and eyes? I mean, it's not going to be for the next 2 years solid, but it won't be long before we start seeing and hearing the back and forth. In fact, just within the GOP, there's going to be a heated primary. You've got establishment Republican Chris Carr. You've got MAGA Republican Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who hasn't officially announced, but he's kind of announced. Kelly Loeffler licking her chops. Let's get the breakdown again from WXIA-TV 11 Alive.
That's right. Joe Ripley with the 11 Alive political team shows us what that governor's race might look like.
The winds of change are coming.
I'm not surprised that people are gearing up for 2026.
Just 2 weeks after Election Day, Emory University political scientist Andra Gillespie says the clock is ticking for the next election. Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr is now gunning for governor. He's the first to announce his entry into the race.
That they can start raising funds, that they can start to garner support, and if they're able to kind of get out ahead in terms of the fundraising name recognition game.
As AG, Carr created a statewide human trafficking and gang prosecution unit. He says he wants to build on the legacies of Governors Kemp, Deal, and Perdue, promising to create jobs, keep Georgians safe, and defend freedom.
Unless it's the freedom to have bodily autonomy, ladies. Don't get too excited. He's still Chris Carr, Republican.
He certainly has statewide experience.
Gillespie says Carr can rally establishment Republicans in the state, but he could contend with other GOP candidates in the primary, including Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, and former U.S. Senator Kelly Loeffler.
Let's stop right there. Brad Raffensperger seems like a nice enough, well-intentioned guy. He is dead on arrival in a GOP primary. Not going to happen. Now, I could concede where you would think, okay, Burt Jones, Kelly Loeffler, they're going to split the MAGA ticket in some way, shape, form, or fashion, the MAGA votes in some way, and that maybe Chris Carr and Brad Raffensperger would get the mainstream Republican vote and split. I just don't think, first of all, I could see where Burt Jones and Kelly Loeffler might split the MAGA vote in a fairly somewhat near even fashion. There is no way that the mainstream Republican vote splits anywhere close to evenly between Chris Carr and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Maybe 80-20, but if you're looking at a split on the other side and it's somewhat even, and then you got Chris Carr to me has the clearer path to being the gubernatorial nominee, only because I believe Burt Jones and Kelly Loeffler, if they both get in, are going to split the MAGA base enough that they will cancel each other out. That'll be interesting to watch. Anyway, I know it's so early to be talking about horse racing like this for the 2026 cycle, but here we are.
Traditionally, Republicans have performed very well in Georgia gubernatorial races. The last Democrat to hold Georgia's highest office, Roy Barnes, who was elected back in 1998.
Way back.
The Georgia Democratic Party issued this response to Carr's bid, saying, quote, he has used his office to rip away women's reproductive freedom, try to gut our health care, waste taxpayer dollars defending Governor Kemp's extreme agenda, and give a free pass to his allies' corruption.
All right, we have a pulse. We have a heartbeat. There's something going. There is life inside the Georgia Democratic Party. That is a positive step. But who could be stepping up from inside the state party to run against a Chris Carr were he to be the GOP nominee for governor?
Gillespie says some mayors, or potentially Congresswoman Lucy McBath, could vie for the Democratic nomination, but it would be an uphill battle to win.
Yes, well, that's a given. I like Lucy McBath. I worry that perceptually Lucy McBath comes off as a one-item candidate, a one-issue politician, obviously gun rights, which is not a good place to start, honestly, when you're running for governor in the state of Georgia. I remember when Stacey Abrams made her first run for governor, and she said something about carving off the side of the Stone Mountain park. I remember that, and I thought, oh, you can't do that. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I mean, obviously something should be done about that. But at that point in time in 2018, you couldn't say that and not already alienate a huge chunk of voters. And I also happen to think that Lucy McBath, and I totally get her story. It's a wonderful story. It's a heartbreaking, gut-wrenching story when it comes to gun rights, losing her son to gun violence. I think it starts from a point of a huge deficit right away if you're running for a statewide office. And I don't know what Mayor Andre Gillespie at Emory University might be thinking of, but it sure as hell, it will not be Andre Dickens. Nope. He has cast his lot and spurned grassroots activists and organizers in the state of Georgia, specifically around Metro Atlanta, due to the Atlanta Public Safety Training Facility. No way in hell he becomes the Democratic nominee for governor of the state of Georgia. Sorry, not going to happen.
No matter who wins, Gillespie says voters will make decisions based on issues like healthcare, crime, and the economy. In Atlanta, Joe Ripley, 11 Alive News.
Yeah, healthcare, that's going to be, will Medicaid expansion even still be on the table by 2026 with the incoming Trump administration? Yeah, who knows? But that is something that looms large. And the Georgia Republicans have tried their damnedest to concoct parallel programs for things like healthcare expansion that have failed. Governor Brian Kemp's Georgia Pathways program has been a huge failure and a huge money loser. But God bless them, they stand firm. They don't quit. I mean, we've been sitting here waiting for trickle down for 40 years, so why not let Georgia Pathways have another decade or so while people continue to die? No, I think healthcare will be a big issue. Abortion rights, still a big issue in 2026. You know what? Here's a start. If you're going to run for the Democratic nomination for the state's highest office, maybe you should run on an abortion ballot issue. In the state of Georgia, you can't have a statewide referendum on an issue like that, but maybe that's the issue you run on, and you don't necessarily have to run on abortion, which, by the way, I think a majority of Georgians are actually for abortion rights. But you run on, I want to give you the opportunity to weigh in on important decisions like reproductive rights. You can run on the issue of letting an issue be decided by the voters. There, you can do that. What else did he mention? Crime. Okay, sure. Crime, obviously. But I think you intrinsically tie crime in the economy. This is where Democrats haven't always done a really good job at putting together the full scope, the full picture of things. We focus on crime thinking, well, we've got to ammo and arm up our police officers to the teeth, and we've got to triple the size of police presence in order to quell crime. Okay, great. But if you're not doing anything to handle the economy for folks who are on the lower end of the income spectrum, you're not going to solve crime. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't. My God, I could fit this on a bumper sticker. I say it all the time. It is true. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't. I mean, it also exists in the Trump cabinet, but whatever. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't. So if you're not doing anything to solve the lack of opportunity, the obstacles to opportunity, just to opportunity, then you're not going to solve crime. And that's something Democrats need to run on. Republicans have been talking about dealing with crime for a long time. What they don't want to do is deal with the lack of opportunity, which continues to feed crime. My God, how hard is that to say? I just said it off the top of my head. Crime exists where opportunity doesn't. And that's something that the next Democratic gubernatorial nominee or any statewide office candidate needs to speak to. If you want to eliminate crime in the state of Georgia and these United States, you've got to work on the opportunity part. State's minimum wage, I believe on paper, it's actually less than the federal minimum wage. So if the federal minimum wage ever went away, the minimum wage in Georgia would be, you got to talk about that. And I mean, it's been since 2009, y'all. Sit down. It's been 15 years since we've touched the federal minimum wage. In 15 years, how much less do you think that $7.25 is worth? I mean, we've been harping on inflation for the longest time, right? The last 4 years, how expensive it's been. How much less your money buys for you. The cost of eggs, the cost of bread, right? Why aren't we talking about the minimum wage? And why are we not talking about addressing it? Oh my God, it's gonna raise the cost of my value meal. So what? Stop spending so much on junk food. Hell, get healthier. Might lower your insurance premium. I'm just saying, it's time to talk about the minimum wage. It's well past time to start talking about the minimum wage. It's something that Democrats have gotten away from talking about at all. It's as if they've just kind of given up. Republicans aren't going to go with it. In fact, I believe we're at an interesting part dynamically where you might actually could goad Republicans in Washington, for example, to raise the minimum wage. Give them credit for it. I don't give a damn. As long as the ideology continues to move forward, who cares who gets the credit? Let them have the credit for raising the minimum wage. Donald Trump is so easy to manipulate sometimes that you can convince him to do things that benefit progressive and liberal ideologies if you tell him how good it'll be for the economy. Yeah. I mean, hey, Walmart's already raised its minimum wage. Most of the major retailers pay well above $7.25 an hour. Most of the fast food places do too. So why not go ahead and raise the minimum wage? Small businesses. Yeah, give small businesses the tax break that they need to meet the cost of raising the minimum wage. Do it in staggered numbers if you need to, until it reaches a point where it's actually, I don't know, kind of worth what $7.25 an hour was worth in 2009. Just an idea, just spitballing. Just gradually get your way up there. Offer tax credits that sort of disappear as time goes on for small businesses only. And get the minimum wage back up to at least the kind of buying power it had when it was $7.25 in 2009. And let them have credit for it. I don't give a damn who gets credit for it. Just do it because it's the right thing to do. That being said, I don't expect Republicans to do this, and I don't expect Democrats to get out of way in letting Trump and MAGA Republicans in Washington do this either. So it needs to be a major campaign issue for the Georgia Democratic Party gubernatorial nominee heading into 2026, whoever it is. I have another really big, it's a big issue. It goes back to talking about what I said a few days ago about Americans kind of losing their zeal for vision. And maybe we test case this out in Georgia again, that we get back to the JFK-like man on the moon by the end of the decade sort of vision and strategy. And I think that there is an appetite in this country for that. It's just that we sort of lost our way, and politicians and both parties have sort of abandoned the idea of feeding into the appetite that I think we the people do have for vision in this country. It's a big item. It's a huge item, and I think it would transform the state of Georgia, and the next governor of this state could lead the way. What is that? I'll discuss when the Ron Show returns. Give me just a few minutes here. Going to go grab some coffee. America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Thanks for listening. RonShowATL.com is the website where you can always get all the show notes. Everything you hear me discuss or anything I pull audio from or read from, I cite my sources, baby. RonShowATL.com. That's, by the way, where you can also go if you'd like to throw a few bones at the show. Support the show. I noticed my junk folder. I got emails from Tim Walz and Kamala HQ and all these progressive PACs and Democrat. I'm still getting fundraising emails, but they're landing in my junk folder all of a sudden. I didn't do that. They just started showing up in my junk folder instead of my... And I'm laughing because why are you still... I get it. You're setting up for whatever the next step is. And Democrats... We had Jay Bookman on yesterday from the Georgia Recorder columnist. He had a great idea. Democrats need to start using some of this money now, and not just the last 3 months of an election cycle to just bludgeon people with messaging. Yeah, start planting the seeds of thought now. That's what I'm doing. So feel free to contribute to this show, and it'll be like donating to a candidate or political party, but I'm on the air 5 days a week pushing these ideas out. And the idea that I have for whoever should be the next gubernatorial nominee for the state of Georgia for the Democratic Party is you got to start talking about something big, visionary, connecting the state. The state of Georgia is so disconnected. It is intrinsically tied to an interstate highway system that does not serve the needs of the state adequately and efficiently. And it doesn't even serve the cities outside of Metro Atlanta that also need to be growth opportunities for the state of Georgia. Atlanta is the economic engine, but Augusta could be a bigger contributor. Athens certainly could be. Gainesville, just north of Athens, could be. Macon, Columbus, Savannah, Valdosta. Valdosta could be a huge hub of activity. Unfortunately, you can't get from Augusta to Valdosta without a bunch of back road state highways. Savannah to Augusta. Those are two pretty decent-sized metro areas, not connected by an interstate. Macon to Augusta, same thing. Macon to Athens, same thing. You can't get Chattanooga to Athens. Oh my God, it's all back roads. Georgia is disconnected and needs to be greater connected. We have a university system in this state with institutions in every part of the state, and yet getting to them is very difficult. I've pitched this before. Georgia needs to look at our transit situation and go, this is inefficient. This is inadequate. And the next governor of the state of Georgia needs to be a visionary on this subject. We need high-speed rail that connects the state to each other. That's the vision. And if you need to, you can even say, well, MARTA, Metro Atlanta Transit Authority, it's ineffective, it's inefficient. And decide that we are going to build, GRATA, the Georgia Rapid Transit Authority, GRATA, and connect Atlanta to Athens, Athens to Augusta, Atlanta to Macon, Macon to Columbus, Macon to Savannah, Savannah to Macon to Atlanta, Metro Chattanooga, the south. Do you see what's happening here? They're all connected to the Atlanta airport. We're connecting through Kennesaw State University and Clayton State University, Columbus State University. You're connecting to the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, through Gwinnett County and their various campuses, and over to Augusta University. Savannah has several schools. You've got to have a means for students to be able to get to and from these campuses, right? Without having to spend extra money. You're going to be saving college students and their parents money when they don't have to pay money to pay for extra housing or even food. And of course, it would be really super nice to be able to get on a train in Athens and get to the airport for your flight, or Columbus and get to your flight, or Dalton and get to your flight, or Savannah and get to your flight without spending hundreds of dollars on a connecting flight from the tiny airports in Savannah or at Augusta or Athens or Columbus, right? Visionary. It would be nice to be able to buy a cheaper home in Henry County, knowing that you have a job in downtown Atlanta. You could spend $300,000 on a house instead of $650,000 on a house, and think of the money you're saving there. And all you got to do is just drive to the train station in McDonough, and boom, you're in Atlanta in 35 minutes. Vision. The next governor of the state of Georgia needs to have vision. This needs to be a 2050 target project. This has to be done by 2050 and show some implementation stages along the way, because as we heard from Bill Torpy, I think in the AJC op-ed earlier this week with regards to two transportation initiatives in Cobb and Gwinnett County, they lacked vision. It was all about, oh, good, more bus routes. And the people who were voting on it looked in their driveway, saw they had two cars, and thought, well, that's better than getting in a smelly bus. Vision. The next gubernatorial nominee from the state of Georgia's Democratic Party needs to have vision. Yes, healthcare expansion is a big deal. Women's reproductive rights, a big deal. Tackling crime, the economy, big deals. The state has a huge surplus. It needs to put that surplus to work, and we need to feed this country and this state's appetite for vision. We haven't had it in a really long time. We've been beaten down by a lot of things over time. We've been divided from within by forces from without, and we haven't come together on a collective vision. Everyone would benefit from the sort of rail transit that I'm talking about in some way, shape, form, or fashion. It needs to be a major sales pitch, I believe, for the next candidate for governor from the Georgia Democratic Party. Eisenhower in Germany saw the Autobahn and thought, we need this in this country. Well, Europe has a fantastic rail network, and we need that in this country. Florida's already developing theirs. The Bright Line connects a lot of the state and will be connecting fully from Tallahassee to Miami. Hell, we could join theirs, and look what we're doing. We're growing our rail network. Needs to happen. Back after this, The Ron Show, America One Radio, and Progressive Voices via TuneIn.
Broadcasting 5 days a week to make common sense common again. This is The Ron Show on America One Radio.
I strongly support LGBTQ rights and equality. No one should be discriminated against. I have friends and family that identify as LGBTQ. Understanding how they feel and how they've been treated is important. Having been around gay, lesbian, and transgender people has informed my opinion over my lifetime. Oh, do you think I'm saying that? No. I mean, I'm in the alphabet mafia, so I can't just say I've been around lesbian, gay, transgender people. I am gay, not lesbian, not transgender, but I've been around all of them. I'm among them. I am part of them. I am the alphabet mafia. No, those aren't my words. I didn't say that. I mean, I agree with every part of that. Every fiber in my being says, yes, I want to vote for whoever is running for office who talks like that. It's Nancy Mace. That's right. Nancy Mace, in an interview back in 2021, told a reporter by the name of Brad Palumbo how she felt about LGBTQ rights. Brad Palumbo writes, to be fair, the Congresswoman hasn't entirely abandoned support for LGBT rights, as she broke with the majority of the Republican Party in 2022 to support the Respect for Marriage Act, which enshrines same-sex marriage protections into federal law. Still, the stance she's taking now seems entirely devoid of the kind of nuance and empathy Mace originally branded herself around. What happened to Nancy Mace? I have a couple of theories. One is that standing up for the marginalized is really hard. It's not something that you can do haphazardly or half-heartedly. It is full-on, never off, always learning, always growing, always researching, always listening, and having empathy for the marginalized. It is a long slog. It's not easy. What is easy is being manipulated or shouted down or shamed for being woke. Look at Bill Maher. Bill Maher, you would say, is as liberal as they come, right? Bill Maher has been shamed from believing he's woke. The man who has been chastising Republican politicians for going on 3 decades now has tapped out on supporting the transgender community. It's a bridge too far for him. It seems now that it is a bridge too far for Nancy Mace as well. Although, again, listen to what she said in 2021. I strongly support LGBT for trans, Q rights, and equality. No one should be discriminated against. That's Nancy Mace, just 3 years ago. I have friends and family that identify, she says, as LGBTQ Understanding how they feel and how they've been treated is important. And yet, ever since Delaware Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride was named victorious in her congressional race, it seems Nancy Mace has made it priority number one in all the time she's going to spend going forward to address, to make sure that Sarah McBride and she don't get to wash hands at the same bathroom vanity, share a locker room, have stalls, women have stalls, in the same bathroom. And I just have to ask, what changed? I think the temperature nationally went up when it came to trans issues. I also think Nancy Mace saw what everybody else did. Tens of millions of dollars spent on advertisements aimed at voters who could be easily swayed on trans issues, hyperbole for the most part. And she saw the light. Philip Bump at the Washington Post writes, last year, the Daily Beast obtained a handbook that was provided to staffers in Representative Nancy Mace's Capitol Hill office, a document that outlined a hyperactive approach to ensuring that Mace was in the public eye. The staff would file 25 pieces of legislation each year. It demanded, with an unheard of 10 being passed by the chamber. It also demanded that Mace appear on television almost incessantly. Staffers, the Daily Beast Jake LaHoot wrote, needed to book Mace on a national TV outlet between 1 and 3 times per day, a staggering 9 times per week at a minimum, according to former staffers who had seen past handbooks, and on local TV channels at least 6 times per week. On top of that, staff were asked to issue at least 1 press release a day. Still reading from Philip Bump's piece in the Washington Post, they haven't hit that goal this week, missing Tuesday. But it's safe to say Mace's national TV benchmark has been met. 2 of the press releases, issued Monday and Wednesday, explain why. Mace has spent the week aggressively insisting that women's restrooms in the Capitol be unavailable to Representative-elect Sarah McBride because McBride is trans. After Mace was first elected in 2020, she positioned herself as a champion of LGBTQ issues. She spoke to conservative Washington Examiner in March 2021, telling reporter Brad Palumbo, who I read from earlier, I strongly support LGBTQ rights and equality. No one should be discriminated against. She acknowledged that this might be in conflict with questions of, quote, religious liberty, but added that she had friends and family who identified as LGBTQ. Mace shared the article on her public social media account, picking out some of the quotes she'd offered back then, saying, I strongly support LGBTQ rights. No one should be discriminated against. Religious liberty, gay rights, and transgender equality can all coexist. I'm also a constitutionalist. We have to ensure anti-discrimination laws don't violate religious freedom. But that was early 2021, Philip Bump writes, when there was space in the national conversation for an ambitious freshman Republican to extend grace to a marginalized community that was generally more sympathetic to politicians from the other party. Over the course of 2021, though, with President Joe Biden in the White House, the Republican narrative shifted forcefully against efforts to build a more inclusive country. Fox News spoke relentlessly about the purported threat of, quote, critical race theory, a barely veiled effort to fight back against the discussions of systemic racism that exploded in mid-2020. Republicans also began highlighting the idea that trans people, too, had been granted too much visibility, with right-wing voices like libs of TikTok launching ferocious attacks on LGBTQ Americans. Target and Bud Light faced boycotts, championed on Fox and in right-wing social media for treating the LGBTQ community as potential customers. God forbid. In late 2022, Mace ran for re-election against Democrat Annie Andrews, a doctor at Medical University of South Carolina's Shawn Jenkins Children's Hospital, because Andrews expressed support of trans kids. Mace accused her of supporting, quote, child abuse, picking up on the right's lines of attack. Then came 2024, Philip Bump writes, An election in which residents of Delaware elected the first openly trans person to Congress, and in which Americans elected Donald Trump president after his campaign put an anti-trans spot into heavy rotation on swing state televisions. In 2016, even Trump shrugged at the idea of a trans woman using a women's bathroom. But by 2024, the Republican base had been fed a steady diet of anti-trans rhetoric, making trans issues fertile ground for anyone willing to engage in the fight. Mace was willing. This week, Philip Bump writes she introduced a bill that would exclude trans women from women's restrooms at the Capitol, a bill that would affect all trans women, not just McBride. But Mace made clear that her target was McBride, a personification of the abstract and infrequent battle in which Republicans were engaged. And let me say here before I pivot to what I'm positing in that reality by saying, I don't wish to dismiss when a woman or anyone tells me that something makes them uncomfortable. I do not. It's hard, however, not to notice that the Nancy Mace that was pro-LGBTQ in 2021 has decided now it's more about the LGBTQ, I guess, and not so much the T, because railing on the T has become quite popular, quite lucrative, and created success within her party. Brad Palumbo writing, to be fair, situations involving locker rooms or changing spaces are more complicated, and it's entirely understandable that many women wouldn't want to share those spaces with people who retain some male anatomy. But lumping those more legitimate concerns in with washing your hands next to someone who happens to be trans destroys our ability to have a nuanced conversation about those tricky questions. Mace claims she's receiving death threats, which are unacceptable, Brad Palumbo writes, I would agree, and should be investigated by law enforcement. But such behavior is not representative of the entire LGBTQ community any more than individual QAnon extremists are representative of all Republicans, and doesn't change the reality of the situation. Mace justifies, Palumbo writes, her position, her resolution in part, by arguing that these restrictions are needed for women to remain comfortable in their shared spaces. But ironically, her resolution would lead to a perverse situation where transgender men who work in Congress, who may have beards and large muscles and outwardly appear indistinguishable from other men, would be forced to use the women's restroom. Wouldn't that make women much more uncomfortable? Palumbo writes, this entire crusade is a solution in search of a problem, but then most Republican narratives are. Most of their ideas, most of what drives them is, this doesn't solve economic woes, this doesn't deal with Ukraine, this doesn't deal with Israel and Gaza, this doesn't deal with climate change. Those are too heady for Republicans to deal with, but it sure stirs up the base. Palumbo writes, whether Mace realizes or not, she has likely shared the women's bathroom with transgender women who work for Democratic members of Congress many times without any issue. And anyone who has traveled internationally or ever been to some of the swankiest restaurants in Washington, D.C. has likely used unisex bathrooms with stalls and lived to tell the tale. I mentioned, by the way, Mace grew up with a brother. There were probably tampons under the sink, and I don't think it affected how he came up. I don't think it affected her either. Back to Palumbo's writing. Mace openly admits that this is directly targeted at McBride, answering a reporter's question by saying, yes, and absolutely, and then some. Someone with a penis in the women's locker room. That's not okay. I'm a victim of abuse myself. I'm a rape survivor. Palumbo writes, while Mace's past trauma is tragic and worthy of our sympathy, I'm going to underline that, absolutely. Palumbo writes, her logic here still doesn't follow. She has no idea what genitalia McBride has, as some transgender women choose to have bottom surgery that removes their penises, and some do not. And genitalia does not ever need to be exposed in a women's bathroom that's exclusively composed of individual stalls, which is the central focus of the Congresswoman's efforts, at least in theory. Nancy Mace's stand does seem to be succeeding in its real goal, Palumbo writes, bringing widespread attention to Nancy Mace. After all, this is the same Congresswoman who dramatically wore a shirt branded with a scarlet letter to work because people were criticizing her for voting to oust then Speaker Kevin McCarthy. From a public relations perspective, this might all work out for Mace. This is kind of where I'm going. Who is seeking to court a new base of support after her district was redrawn and now skews more conservative than when she was first elected. But if the Congresswoman's antics ultimately succeed, it will only lead to more unnecessary antagonism, increased hostilities, and more dysfunction in the already broken halls of Washington, D.C. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there aren't folks left of center who are also confused or don't know how to feel on trans issues. One of my very best friends has worked for Democratic candidates for more than 30 years. She herself isn't sure how to feel about this. She doesn't make big public spectacles of it, though. She listens. She voices her concerns when she feels it's necessary to, but she does it from a position of respect. Nancy Mace is not showing at all any respect to the transgender community. She is instead, I believe, using her past trauma, and this is what's really gross, using her past trauma, and this is my opinion, to score political points. Thank you, gerrymandering, for that, because she now represents a more conservative district than she did once before. Charleston, by the way, a central part of her district when she was elected. It's a pretty liberal city in a red state, surrounded by red areas. So to serve that city and the rest of that district, you kind of got to walk the line a little bit. Nancy Mace's district no longer depends so much on Charleston. What's ironic is because of gerrymandering, her district sort of curves around much of Charleston, so it doesn't encompass all of Charleston. And this other gerrymandered district that takes up a large chunk of the Charleston electorate is the 6th congressional district that serves the one Democrat in the state who serves from the state of South Carolina, Jim Clyburn. Gerrymandering doesn't help. It may help the one politician or the other politician. It actually protects the majority by giving them more of a majority representation where necessary or where they feel necessary because it's drawn by them to protect them. But it doesn't serve the American people. It just greater divides the American people. And Nancy Mace, to me, is emblematic of that and just shows an ugliness that we, the people, don't actually really have until we're goaded into showing it. And Nancy Mace, easily manipulated to act a way that she, 3 years ago, would never have dreamed of acting because her words tell us that. It's The Ron Show. Back after this. America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Final few minutes of today's Ron Show, and for the week, by the way. So, in Atlanta yesterday, there was a Senate committee hearing, a Georgia Senate committee hearing, considering restrictions on trans women's college sports participation. It's already, by the way, not allowed at the high school level in the state of Georgia. And now the state of Georgia's Republican-led Senate committee wants to move on and focus on college participation. Sasha Bookert, an attorney with Lambda Legal, was on Zoom yesterday to take part in this, and I want you to hear what Sasha had to say.
As with any public proposal policy, I think the first question always should be, what problem is this seeking to solve? And it just can't be that transgender girls are a threat to displaced women in sports. It's statistically impossible. Trans kids make up 1.4% of the population entirely, and half of that is obviously 0.7%. And sadly, very few of that 0.7% of transgender girls participates in sports. So it's just not possible. And often, I'm sure that's not the case here, but I've heard from a lot of legislators who are supportive of categorical bans who are unable to identify a single transgender athlete in their state, much less a transgender girl in their state. And I guess I would just ask, we don't have to go through this now, but I would just ask you to, consider that question. And I really feel like it's part of responsible policy making to have met with the constituents that are going to be most directly impacted by whatever policy proposal comes out of this, and really urge you to meet with them and to hear their stories. And I think you'll be, pleasantly surprised. But I really feel like that's a must-have as part of this process. I want to quote Utah Governor Cox's veto memo in striking down, a similar proposal for a categorical ban, who, highlighted, as hopefully I'll get across today, that, these are great kids. They're kids who face enormous struggles. And he mentioned three numbers specifically: 75,000, 4, and 1. 75,000 kids playing sports in Utah. I'm sure that number is much higher in Georgia, but I think it's proportionally the same. 4 trans kids playing sports, and one transgender girl playing sports. And, and he went on to say that, 4 kids and only one of them playing girls sports. That's what this is all about. 4 kids who aren't dominating or winning trophies or taking scholarships. 4 kids who are just trying to find some friends and feel like they're a part of something. 4 kids trying to get through their day. Rarely has so much fear and anger been directed at so few. And, I just want to, as an aside, I haven't had a chance to participate in this process, but, just, looking at the way that, these issues are discussed, I just want to note for the committee and urge you to be really careful about the way the rhetoric is targeting trans youth. There's a real, aside from whatever happens and whatever proposal comes out of this committee, there's an impact on the mental health of these kids when when demonizing terms are used or words that are, weaponized to really, marginalize and stigmatize them. That is going to have a lifelong effect. So I just would urge the committee to be really careful about how these conversations are framed. Another point is that, often these bans are premised on hypothetical and dire warnings about, the harm that's going to come, by having an inclusive policy to women's sports. But I think, again, as part of responsible public policy making, you need to look at empirical evidence. And yes, we'll talk about the science, but I think it's also really important to talk about, what's happened where these policies are in place across the country. And based on the numbers that the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey has shown, participation among high school girls has remained the same in states where there are inclusive policies. In fact, the numbers have dropped in the states where there are bans. And in some places like California and Connecticut, numbers have increased among cisgender girls. And I think another impact in talking about cisgender girls is that, these bans and the way these things are talked about has led to heightened gender verification accusations. We hear stories all the time of, parents accusing kids playing sports of being transgender because they don't conform with gender stereotypes. Or often some of these bills, include, ways that students can prove their gender if they're accused of being transgender. So there's a side effect on that.
In large part, the thing is, these conversations are happening in something of a partisan vacuum, because I don't see a whole lot of Democrats speaking up or advocating for the transgender community, because right now they are the picked on, the most picked on. They're the flavor of the week for bigotry. And silence is complicity, in my mind. See, for all the posturing that then Attorney General Kamala Harris did in California for the transgender community, her silence in the closing days of her presidential election, to me, were far more damaging than any comfort she gave when affirming what was just federal law, by the way. It's not that the ACLU questionnaire, etc. All she did was affirm what is federal law. Medically necessary procedures are covered by taxpayer dollars. Period. End of story. No two ways about it. You may not like that people in prison, for example, for violent crimes or for any crimes, get tax-free health care. Too bad. That's federal law. The Harris campaign, Kamala Harris, they did not say that. They didn't say anything. They let those ads run rampant. Silence was complicity in that regards, and it didn't even pay off for the campaign. And I know that not all liberals or even progressives are going to agree with me on everything trans-related. That's fine. But let's at least have an adult conversation about it. And remember that there are human beings involved with feelings and emotions. And showing some empathy is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of intellectualism and a strength. It's going to do it for The Ron Show. Back next week, 9 to 10 a.m., 5 to 6 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. to midnight at Progressive Voices via TuneIn. Show notes at ronshowatl.com. Have a great weekend.